Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the conservation podcast. The show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and today I am joined by Rebecca Smith, the Executive Director of Tierra. This organisation is working to save wildlife across Paraguay, and today Rebecca is here to talk candidly about the huge issues facing wildlife in the country and how the situation is more shocking than you might even imagine. She also talks about her work with capuchins, what motivates her, and how she believes we need to be more prepared to have difficult and challenging conversations in the world of conservation. So, on a slightly more serious note than usual, but no less important and no less impactful note than usual, let's get started. Welcome back to the show. I am now joined by Dr. Rebecca Smith, the Executive Director of Tierra. This organisation conserves fragile habitats in Paraguay through scientific research, community engagement and environmental education. And today, Rebecca is here to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about her work with capuchins. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me today, Rebecca.
No, thank you for the invite.
Absolutely no problem. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm really excited to talk about your projects and some of the work that you do. I think it'll be really, really interesting because we haven't talked a lot about primates on the show, actually, because I think a lot of people assume they are all well protected because we love them and all that sort of stuff. So we've not covered them really since our lemur series. So it'll be really interesting to kind of loop back to them and talk a little bit more about them. I guess, though, to get us started, I have introduced you briefly, but obviously you know you and your work and everything that you do a lot better than I do. So could you introduce yourself to the listeners, tell them a little bit about who you are, what it is that you do, maybe a little bit about, just a little bit about you.
So, hi everybody. Like you said, I'm Rebecca Smith. I'm originally from Edinburgh in Scotland. I moved to Paraguay at the start of 2013, so nearly 10 years ago, somehow. And I originally came out here to study the hooded capuchin monkey. I had just finished a master's in primate biology, behaviour and conservation, and was really just looking for any permanent job with any type of primate. I wish it was a better story than that, but it's really not. But I did kind of come here knowing nothing about the country, didn't speak the language, never been to South America before. And I was that guy who did one lesson on Rosetta Stone and rocked up in the country yeah, I'll be fine. And nobody here speaks English, or they didn't. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire. But yeah, it was pretty quickly the capuchin got right under my skin. I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the conservation situation in Paraguay is very, very extreme. And I'd done volunteering and worked in Namibia. I'd done research in Puerto Rico and in Panama. So I thought that I understood what conservation issues were. And then arriving here, I realized I was really, really wrong and had a lot to learn really, really fast. But yeah, basically everything that we do is focused on conserving the habitats here, but first of all through scientific research to provide the base. Because Paraguay, while it had these studies that were done really early on when the Spanish first arrived by people like Azara, 200-300 years ago, after that there was a very, very long period of time of basically no scientific research being done here. So Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, they all had a lot, and there was just this huge gap in the middle of the continent. And that makes conservation really hard when you don't even know what's there, when you don't understand the ecology of the area. So basically, everything that we try to do is based on scientific research, the results of that, and then using that to inform our education programs.
That's really, really interesting.
I
That's
don't know if
really,
I
really,
answered the question or ramble.
yeah, I think that's perfect. It's covered. It's touched on so many little things that I think we'll come back to and unpack a bit more throughout the conversation. So I think if anything, it was the perfect. Even if it was a ramble, it was the perfect ramble. It was a great little intro. And I guess kind of leading on from that, there's a couple different things that I wanted to touch on. The first thing that I noticed was like we have very similar kind of paths. I am also from Scotland, if listeners didn't know. I'm from Dunfermline, so just over the kind of over the bridge from where you're from. I was meant to go to Namibia on a field trip before COVID, so studied it from afar. So yeah, I feel like I'm just like one or two steps behind. Hopefully, I'll end up in somewhere doing something as interesting as you in those next couple steps. So that was the first thing that jumped out. The second thing that jumped out was we kind of have talked. You kind of talked a little bit there about kind of how you had never been there to Paraguay before. You didn't know kind of maybe what you were stepping into. I hadn't written this down as a question, but just to get us started, how do you kind of go from that to then being the executive director of a charity? How does that happen? How is that pathway? That's probably a big question, but like in brief, like how do you go from 0 to 100 so fast?
Well, it wasn't really. I came to run the primate project originally. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't come to run the charity. I was 24 when I arrived, and there's absolutely no way in hell I would have been capable of this job. When I arrived, thinking, yeah, people will speak English, and you'll just tell people that monkeys are nice, and they'll stop cutting the forest down like that. Yeah, no, not how conservation works, unfortunately. But I arrived, so PLT had been running for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. When I arrived, it was founded by a Scottish geneticist, just coincidence as well. I didn't know her before I came here, called Karina Atkinson. And she basically founded it from like nothing. She came to volunteer with a different organization in Paraguay, and didn't want to leave, so founded her own NGO. And they had, I think it was sort of a few months to a year before I arrived, that we were based on this like really tiny private reserve, sort of like northeast in the country, in the Atlantic forest side of the country, in the eastern side of the country, and they had found that there were monkeys on the reserve, and obviously like primates are a really, really popular species, so she was looking for somebody to like start a proper project with them, and it just so happens that she put that advert out right as I was finishing my master's. So I arrived to basically build a primate project here, and then just kind of moved up, and then Karina left a year ago, just after like just over a decade here. Just time to move on, and I took over from her after that. So it was more sort of chance than anything else.
I mean, pretty good chance. Like it's that's, and I feel like a lot of hard work between
Yeah,
as well. Not just kind of like oh, just by chance I got handed this thing. That's 9-10 years of work. That's a long
yeah.
like. So really, 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 really interesting. So when you kind of got there, obviously you were kind of talking about how you didn't necessarily know a lot of the challenges. And for me, when I was kind of doing my research and when it was kind of first mentioned to me, oh, you should do a podcast with Rebecca, her work is really, really interesting. I kind of thought, I don't actually know much about Paraguay. I've talked to people from Brazil who work on tapirs and armadillos and anteaters and stuff, so I know a little bit more about Brazil. I think it's kind of almost the Amazon in that kind of area of South America is almost the kind of poster child for conservation in the continent. But I didn't know much about any really of the other countries particularly. So I was really intrigued, and I guess for me, as much as for the listeners, could you tell us a little bit about what this conservation situation is in Paraguay, kind of on a general kind of level, before we focus in on your specific work?
Yes, and I'll apologise in advance because this is really depressing, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's awful. So, Paraguay is like right in the middle. It's one of two landlocked countries in South America, and it's basically right in the middle of the continent. So it's kind of the confluence of a lot of the really famous habitats that people associate with other countries. The northern half of the country is what's known as the Gran Chaco, or the Dry Chaco, and it's South America's biggest dry forest. And right now it's kind of the last stronghold of all of Paraguay's megafauna, like the jaguar and tapir and like the bigger animals. You just don't find them in the south anymore. The southwest side of the country is humid Chaco, which is like swamps, grasslands, palm savannas, and we're based in, like, our base is in the very southwest tip, in a part of the humid Chaco called the Ñeembucú wetland complex. And then the east of the country is Atlantic forest. So it's like the Atlantic forest, they're not as well known because like the Amazon just takes all of the attention. But the Atlantic forest, when you read about it, it tends to be the publication it gets is like the Atlantic forests of Brazil. But actually it goes from Brazil's Atlantic coast all the way through to like the whole east of Paraguay, into Argentina. It used to go like into Uruguay a little bit, but it doesn't really anymore. And across its whole range, it's it's a biodiversity hotspot. Really high levels of endemism in plant and animal species, and it's one of the most critically endangered terrestrial habitats in the world. So across the whole range, about 13% is left, and about 70% of the Amazon is still intact. So that gives you an idea of like just how much worse the situation is. And then in Paraguay, it's a type of Atlantic forest called Upper Paraná Atlantic Forest, and it's basically gone. Until the year 2000, Paraguay had the highest deforestation rate in the world, and this is mainly for the industrial production of soy. In 2004, they introduced a law which is called the Zero Deforestation Law, and it's one that the government got a lot of praise for. It got an award and all sorts for like contributions to conservation, which is, but yeah, I mean, I've got opinions on that. But it's on paper, it's a good law. Like, it's better that it's there than that it's not. But it's so full of loopholes. It's not enforced properly. I mean, between 2004 and 2013, like another 7,500 square kilometers of forest was cleared. Even more of that up till now. And I mean, to give you an idea, so from the research I did, which was like looking at the forest in terms of its quality for capuchin monkeys. Originally, the original cover of this forest in Paraguay was 86,000 square kilometers. By 2019, there was 9,300 square kilometers left. And that's not pristine either. There's only two areas in the whole country which have more than 50,000 hectares. And one of them is not protected at all. It gets called a national park, but it's not. So like the situation is really bad. On top of that, the Chaco, when the zero deforestation law was brought in the east, that doesn't cover the Chaco habitat. And at the same time that the Atlantic forest became so-called protected, the Chaco became the fastest disappearing habitat on the continent. And the main problem up there is cattle ranching. And believe it or not, meat, and that is not actually, I mean, it is part of it, but one of the big things that it gets used for is leather for things like luxury cars, which I was really mind blown by when I found that out. It's not something that occurred to me. You hear like cattle ranching and you think only like meat production, but yeah, it's not just that. But all of that is kind of compounded by the fact that like the education system in Paraguay is like well documented as one of the weakest in the world. In 2018, it was ranked at 136 out of 138 countries for the quality of its education, and 137 out of 138 for the quality of its maths and science education. So it's like the conservation community here is very, very small, and not really very, very powerful. So while Paraguay has like all of these really cool habitats, and I mean all of these like the sort of like the big animals that people would think about with South America, like the giant anteater and the jaguar and the tapir and giant armadillo, they are all here, but they're in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. It's shocking to me because whenever you think of the kind of charismatic megafauna, those are of South America, those are like the big ones, and you'd expect, oh, if they're there, people would want to be fighting for their protection, even if they didn't talk about the smaller things, if they didn't talk about the capuchins, you'd think having those would be enough to attract some level of attention, but it's really strange that it's just not addressed. And I suppose, yeah, it goes hand in hand with the fact that like the international interest probably isn't there because the internal interest is perhaps lower because people don't know maybe what is there and the value of what's there and the importance of what's there. I'm now starting to see already my brain is going, I'm so like, I don't think I'd want to try, like I want to try and solve the issue, but I don't think I'd want to do it alone. That would be that's a tricky situation. Like, what do you, I suppose your organization then, when they come in, like what kind of projects, how do you begin to try and tackle an issue like that, basically, is the question, because it seems like an impossible task. How does your team and everyone involved try and come in, I guess on the kind of Paraguay wide level, and then we'll focus in on the capuchins in a little second, but when you're generally, how do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean it's hard. Like it is. That's the thing. Everything like progress is very, very slow, and there's not an awful lot of support, like both nationally and internationally. It's not like you're sort of like the head of the spear of this like big movement that's fighting it or anything like that. That's just not there. So basically what we've tried to do, because we don't like own any land or anything like that, it's like we can't like work towards protecting an area or like reforestation yet. That's hopefully coming, but what we have focused on mainly is trying to build the not like the scientific knowledge base, like understand the ecology of, like when we were at Laguna Blanca, a lot of what we were doing there was focused on like year-round inventories of just the species in the area, because that wasn't even known. I mean, we found like hundreds of new species for the country, and not just like insects. Like we found an armadillo that nobody knew was here. It was thought to be endemic to Brazil, and then it was found just like trundling through the Cerrado. Just nobody had looked. That was the thing. And like I understand that people have a problem these days with people saying, "Oh, you know what? We discovered this" or anything like this. Oh, local people knew it was there. Okay, yes, yeah, I'm sure they did, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't know if it was a different species from another type of armadillo. And also, local people knowing it's there isn't exactly going to help when they don't have any power to conserve an area. So if you can publish it in the international literature, that is like creating awareness at an international level. Like these problems are so huge, like Paraguay on its own isn't really going to fix them, especially when they're driven by like international market forces. Like the soy industry is not just a Paraguayan thing, it's a global thing. So these discoveries or publications or whatever you want to call them, they're basically just like boosting the knowledge of the country at an international level. At the same time, we built a museum collection. It's the second biggest natural history collection in the country, which like national and international scientists can use. And then so like while like creating that knowledge base, we also run several environmental education programs. The main one is a program called Voces de la Naturaleza, or Voices of Nature, and it's like a series of like eco clubs, we call them, but basically like kind of like scouts or like an after school club. But on Saturday mornings we run clubs for kids to come and learn about nature. We also work with the American Peace Corps, and their volunteers are just coming back now because they were evacuated for COVID, and they arrived back this month. But they just for anyone who doesn't know how they work, because like I didn't know how they worked until they came here. They basically bring volunteers who they put all around the country in different communities who ask for them, and then they like help out in the community. And we train their volunteers how to do environmental education and use our curriculum and like the activities that we've created based on our research, so that they can access like hundreds more kids every week all across the country, because we wouldn't be able to do that alone. And then we do work with like older people as well, adults, like forest guard training courses. Before the pandemic, there was a lot of activities like throughout the country for students or youth groups, and we would always do like workshops for them. That's still kind of picking up again after COVID. I say that like it's over, but like as COVID kind of, we learn to live with it. That's still kind of picking up, but it's what we're focused on right now is kind of like learning about what's here, and then how to like teaching other people about what's here, and then hopefully in the future, like one of our long-term goals is to be able to buy land in the Ñeembucú wetland complex to be able to declare a reserve. I want to start a reforestation program with some of the communities that I work with. So like more practical things. But yeah, that's been more our method so far.
No, it's really interesting, and it's something that I think it's got parallels to a couple different things, and different, like, having done almost 60 of these now, talking to different people with different projects around the world. It's interesting to see kind of how it picks up on. We talked to Sonam Tashilama about his work with the Red Panda Network in Nepal, and they have a similar kind of forest guardian program which has seen good success. So that's kind of a similar thing. And then education programs for young people, Giraffe Conservation Network does similar, and all of these ideas kind of coming together and kind of building a base of people who then know, love, appreciate the nature that's around them. And then they maybe, when they grow up, or if they are grown up, they may just want to, they'll feel more of a connection and they'll want to kind of grow up to protect it. And I suppose also it sets it up so further down the line, it doesn't have to be like the international people coming in and helping all the time. They might be able, if you can increase the education level, they'll be able to then get the degrees and get the kind of scholarships and things to help hopefully return and help to shape and protect the landscapes that they hopefully will love. So it's a really interesting kind of mixed methods kind of education that's going on. It's really, really exciting, really, really interesting. And yeah, I guess hopefully successful. And yeah, I don't know, when you're kind of out there with the kids, do you see a difference in them between kind of when they appear in the kind of clubs and things and by the time they're a few months into them? Is there kind of already a connection forming type situation?
Yeah. I mean, it depends where you're working. So you definitely see it. You see their knowledge increase 100% across like all the communities that we work with. Where I teach, so I personally teach in schools in a rural part of Paraguay. Some which are called like campesino, they're called, which apparently is an insult in some places. It's not in Paraguay. It's just what they call themselves. But that's just like rural Paraguayans. And then I work with some indigenous Buga Guarani communities. You see the knowledge increase everywhere. Like there's cultural differences between the different communities. I mean, obviously everybody's Paraguayan, but somebody who's Paraguayan and from a city has a very different culture than a campesino or an indigenous person. And like you do see sort of an appreciation because they understand it more. But when you're talking about people who come from families that can't feed their children because they don't have any money, they're not going to say, oh, well, you know what, I'd really love to just look at that monkey rather than eat it. Like, they're not going to say that, ever. So while it's like increasing their knowledge and their understanding of why nature's important outside of the cities, it needs to be in, like, there needs to be social programs as well that also sort of alleviate the poverty is very, very extreme in parts of Paraguay. And so, like, long-term conservation will need to work with the kids with the education and getting that interest and that knowledge there, but then also something that means that they can think, well, you know what, that monkey's just nice to look at and I don't need to shoot it. I don't need to just cut down those trees because otherwise I can't have a house. Like, it kind of is like we're building, in those areas, we're building the foundation for it, for the longer term projects. And then in the cities, it makes a huge difference to the kids, and very quickly as well. Like, really, really quickly, you see them starting to care. And like, you'll see, like, even with like domestic animals, like, I've like walked down the street in Pilar where we live and like heard an eco club kid say to their dad, no, don't kick that dog, like, be nice to it, it can feel that. So like, even like at that level, like, no, don't slingshot marbles at the howler monkeys. Like you see that not only them changing their attitudes, but like telling the adults, which is kind of the point as well when you work with kids. But yeah, it really does depend on where you are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Again, that's so similar. We were for listeners, we were introduced by Lynn, who works for the Lemur Conservation Network, and when we did our series, The Land of the Lemurs, these are similar issues again to like we talked about then with the kind of yes, we need to increase, like, everyone thinks of conservation, I suppose, as kind of like the protection of animals, but you have to remember there are people there too. There are people who, when any of us were put in that situation, would do exactly what they're doing. And so it's kind of, it's this awkward kind of helping them. Conservation isn't always about the animals, it's sometimes about the people who live alongside them. And it's a really interesting kind of an important problem to try and solve. So it's interesting to see. And but I suppose kind of a hopeful-ish message there, that there is some improvement, at least in the people that you do reach, and kind of they're kind of making some changes and kind of hopefully getting it into their parents and kind of whispering in their ear, like, oh, we need to be better, we need to do this, we need to, like, that's the good thing. Because that was me as a kid. I feel like I was constantly being the one who was like, not that my parents would ever kick a dog, but that I was constantly in their ear like, oh, we should plant wildflowers, we should do this, we should do that, we should do. So I think I'm living proof that works. But no, that's really, really interesting. I suppose moving on slightly, because I did want to talk about Paraguay and kind of get people familiar with some of the issues that are going on in the country at large to kind of set the scene. But I also wanted to talk about the Capuchin project specifically, and maybe we can get into some more details about kind of specifics in there as well. So I guess to start, I think most people would be familiar with a capuchin from the Night at the Museum series. That's like, I think, where my first introduction to a capuchin came from. It's the little monkey that terrorizes Ben Stiller in that film. But in terms of a more conservation-y, scientific or podcast-worthy introduction, could you introduce the capuchin to us and maybe tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So I mean, that is the sort of best way so that people have it in their head. It's the one that I work with is not the one that's in Night in the Museum and Pirates of the Caribbean, but it looks very like it. Mine's a bit more yellow. But basically there's lots of capuchin species throughout Central and South America. They're split into cebus and sapajous, and the one that I work with is sapajous, which are called the robust capuchins. So an example of cebus would be Marcel from Friends. Like they're a little bit smaller, they're like finer, their heads aren't as big, and yeah, they're the smartest of the Central and South American monkeys by far. Too smart for their own good, sometimes it feels like. And they live in like pretty big groups, lots of males and females in their group. They're very, very social. The Sapajous kai, which is the hooded capuchin, it's the only one that you find in Paraguay. And it also spreads through a little bit of Brazil, Bolivia, and into the Yunkas in Argentina, northern Argentina. Yeah, and it's one of 8 of the robust species. Unfortunately, it's quite a popular pet here. They do not make good pets, ever. Doesn't matter how young you get them, they will become aggressive, and they've got very, very big teeth, so they could do a lot of damage. But yeah, they're in Paraguay. They're basically restricted to what's left of the Atlantic forest. You get them a little bit in the gallery forests of the Cerrado. I think they cross a little bit in the Pantanal, but they're mostly in the Brazilian side of the Pantanal. And most of their range, most of their range is now a soy field, but most of their range was Atlantic forest inside Paraguay.
Mm. That's really, really interesting because I suppose I had always they're one of those animals that like you love and you see them in these things and they're very charismatic, but I didn't know a lot about them. I didn't realize until very recently, I didn't realize there was actually so many different kinds. You just assume, oh, it's like one, but then I suppose it's just my ignorance because there are lots of different types of gibbon, for example. There's lots of different types of all sorts of things. So I should have known, but I don't know why my brain didn't click that was a thing. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. I guess like they're kind of charismatic, interesting, smart little things. But what made you want to work with them in the first place? Was it capuchins that you always wanted to work with, or was it just kind of any kind of primate? What was your kind of introduction to them?
It was just any primate, honestly, or anything that at least I kind of like the ones with bad attitudes. Like my introduction to primates was chacma baboons, which are just horrible. I mean, they're amazing, but like they're not the friendliest of things. And then I did my master's research on rhesus macaques, which again, like really, really smart and bad attitudes. And so I kind of prefer species like that. I mean, we also run a project with the black and gold howler monkey, who are absolutely great. They're an amazing animal to like learn how to do primatology with. I personally wouldn't want to study them, just because I like the like smarter species, which is really biased of me. Yeah, I have to say I didn't realize how hard it would be when I first arrived. I didn't realize how hard they would be to study. I'd only worked with terrestrial species really before. I'd done a little bit of work with howler monkeys in Panama, but like my experience was mainly with terrestrial ones, and then working with these arboreal ones that never stop moving in a habitat that's really, really dense. It's full of wasps that you can't just like run through the forest. I did get a fright at how hard it was.
Mm-hmm. That's I can imagine. It's because it's probably the equivalent of having a very smart little child that you have to study that will run around and do things and jump through trees and do all of these I always forget quite how intelligent some of these things and quite how sneaky they can be. And I suppose you can see all of these Night at the Museum and Pirates of the Caribbean should have been your warning, but the one time animals have been portrayed on film accurately, maybe. No, and
they are like dreadful, and they had this one behavior because the other thing is they were really hard to habituate to human presence. So like one of my study groups at Laguna Blanca, my original study groups, they had this behavior where like one would get really in my face and like make a lot of noise and come really, really close. And I'd be like so excited watching it that I wouldn't realize that the rest of the group had just gone. And there'd be and then when that one knew that the others were away, he would just vanish. And I would just be left standing there like, oh, well, I fell for it again. And like you'd think it would happen once and then you'd be like, I know what you're up to. I'm going to follow the rest of the group. But no, like every single time I fell for it. Absolutely every time. And when I started sort of like when the adult males weren't enough to keep me watching them, it would be like a female with a small one. So I would just be like, oh my God, a baby one. And then the rest of the group would go. I'd be like, oh, damn it, again. Okay. Yeah, they know what they're doing.
I was going to say, that makes me love them even more, I suppose. Like, just the sneakiness, I think, that's some extra points for them. That's fantastic. And really, like, as frustrating as it must have been, must have provided some, excellent and interesting stories for your research. What was it you were actually, we've kind of talked, you were research. What was it you were actually looking into with them? What was it you were studying specifically?
So their basic ecology. So they were only split from Cebus apella in 2012. And like Cebus apella was a really well studied species, but only from a few sites. So when they split that species into 5, all of a sudden there were species that nobody knew anything about because all the work had been done on just a couple of those. And Savage's Kai was one of the ones that we didn't really know anything about. And nothing had been done in Paraguay. I mean, the last primatology study from Paraguay was published in 1985, and the work was done in 1982. So like there was a lot more forest back then. It was a very different country back then. It was still under the dictatorship. Like it just not the same place. And then there was like, before I arrived, there was like 30 years where just nothing was done, like at all. There's no primatologists here. Like when I arrived, I was the only one. I've now hired a couple of other people who are studying primates, but like there's still no Paraguayans studying primates. There's like an interest group now of students who want to learn how to become primatologists, but like they're not there yet, and they're not doing their own work. Like they're not actually studying monkeys yet, but it's still a good start. It's a good step. So basically, like I kind of arrived and I was like trying to look up about this monkey, and there was just nothing. So it was like very, very basic stuff, sort of starting from scratch, like the demographics of their groups, like how they select their sleeping sites, their home range size, social behaviours, their diet. And then when we lost our first field site, and I moved to San Rafael or Tecohaguasu, I had the opportunity to basically compare all of these behaviours in like really degraded forest, which Laguna Blanca was, and then as close to undisturbed as the country still has left, which is San Rafael. So basically compared these two sites to see how they respond to habitat disturbance.
That's really interesting, actually. That's really, really interesting. And like, I suppose it must have been horribly intimidating, but also exciting, but also kind of just strange to, especially when you think of a species that is as maybe well known or as popular as the capuchin and you'd think, oh, it must all be done already. That must be, yeah, quite something to kind of be like, oh, okay, now I'm starting from square one. Was there anything that kind of you maybe didn't kind of compared to maybe what you expected to discover? Was there anything that like took you by surprise about this specific type compared to the others?
Not really in terms of like their behavior and things like that. Everything was kind of what would be expected of the genus. One thing that did surprise me, like I knew the results, like I finished my PhD last year, and like I knew the results were going to be bad. Like I knew, I mean, I've seen too much of Paraguay to think like, yeah, it'll be fine. Like I knew that it was going to be bad. I really didn't think it was going to be as bad as it was. And I remember like, sort of like when we ran the analysis, I remember contacting my supervisor and being like, no, this can't be right. This is gotta be right. He was like, no, it's right. It's right. And like, because basically what we did was we looked at like where you find capuchins in the country, and like where they still are, where we know for 100% they aren't anymore, and then ran a species distribution model based on like their ecological needs. And we did it across 20 years. We did it from 2000 to 2019, so 19 years, to look at like how much forest at different like levels of suitability for the monkey there was during the different years. And like in Paraguay, in those 19 years, we lost 58% of the suitable forest for the monkeys. And that, I was just looking at it like that can't be right. 14 of those years were covered by the zero deforestation law. Like this cannot be right. But it was, unfortunately, it was right. And I mean, out of that, the monkey was reevaluated and is now vulnerable. Before this, it was classed as least concern. And I mean, until this one, the last evaluation happened last year, happened in 2021, and it was still classed as least concern. And it actually said on the IUCN website, this species faces no major threats in Paraguay. And I was like, yeah, no, that's just wrong. That's just not right. That's like, how can you look at these habitat loss statistics and this information and say that this species faces no threats. So we got it, like working with primatologists in Brazil and Argentina as well. We got it upgraded to vulnerable. So that was like a bittersweet win. But I think that was sort of my biggest surprise, was just how bad the situation was. But also, like, it was assumed that the species was more tolerant to habitat disturbance than other species of sapajous. I don't know where that came from. Like, I've tried to find where the evidence is that it is more tolerant, but my results showed that it's actually less tolerant than some other species of sapajous. Like, it's very adaptable. It is very tolerant to habitat disturbance, but not as much as some other sapajous species. So that was sort of the biggest surprise. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be, because it looks as though it's fine living in these tiny bits of forest, but I guess that comes with its own problems of like inbreeding and things like that. Yeah, that was sort of the worst bit, biggest surprise.
That's a fair shock. I think that would be one of those ones where I would convince myself, just the low level imposter syndrome and things that I always have simmering away. I would be like, I'm wrong. I can't. That can't be right. There's no way that's right. That would be a shocker. I wondered when you were talking there, I was just thinking about. I know there's some primate species that have adapted to human expansion, human development, by kind of moving into cities or moving around kind of human inhabited areas. Is that something you notice with this species in particular, or is it not really something that it can do as well?
So I think they could. I think they would be capable of it. There are some places in Paraguay where like they live close to people's houses, but it's not in the cities. It's like, oh, like my house backs onto the forest and there are monkeys in it. In the capital city, there's a population of them in the botanic gardens, but they don't seem to come out of there, or they very rarely come out of there. I've had phone calls before being like, there's one in my garden, and I'm like, just leave it alone and it'll go back into the botanic gardens. Like, don't touch it, it'll bite you. Like, just stay away from it. But they don't seem to have had the opportunity to like move into urban areas. Like in Pilar, the city itself is absolutely full of howler monkeys. There's like 100 individuals living inside the city, but like in people's gardens, not like in a park, like on the roofs. Like I've had it before where I've gone outside and there's been a howler monkey fighting with my cat on the roof. Like they're everywhere. But part of that as well, it's like they've had the opportunity to move in, but also howler monkeys don't do very much. They sleep a lot. Like, okay, sometimes they're very loud in the morning, or if it's going to rain, they can be extremely loud. But they sleep a lot. They have very small home ranges. They're not aggressive. Capuchins, I don't think would be tolerated in the same way that the howler monkeys. Like, people just think of them like, oh, well, it would be like for us, like, oh, there's that squirrel in my garden. People are just like, oh yeah, that monkey's back. Sometimes it eats my mangoes. Capuchins, I just don't think people would tolerate them. They're destructive. They live in much bigger groups. Like, I've been told some stories which are just like brilliant. What someone from Hohenau, which is like a German colony, about an hour from San Rafael, an hour and a half. And they were saying that their neighbour has, like, their house is close to the forest, and he has a chicken coop which has this like machine, like, where the chickens lay their eggs and like the eggs roll down into a bucket. And the capuchins that live in that forest have worked out that, like, where the eggs go, so they sit at the bucket and wait for the chickens to lay their eggs, and they get really impatient if the chickens don't lay fast enough, so they reach their arms up and like grab the chickens' bums, like trying to get the egg if they don't do fast enough. And she was saying that the guy who lives there is really angry because all of his chickens have like featherless bums because the capuchins have pulled out all of their feathers. And like I think he thinks it's funny, which is lucky, because if he didn't actually like that, those capuchins wouldn't be there anymore. There's no question of that. But it's just like stories like that, I just don't think people would allow a large population to come into an urban centre.
That, I mean, yeah, if all of your pets and animals are going to be plucked of feathers and fur, that I can see why that could become, less than ideal. And yeah, as much as it is funny, it is, very lucky that he is, because there's some places where, they'd put traps out or they'd put something out to try and get them and just wouldn't approve at all. So I suppose, very, very, very lucky. I guess aside from then the kind of habitat loss, would you say that's the main challenge? And then is there other challenges that they face, or would you say that's kind of the primary threat to the species?
Yeah, the habitat loss is the big one. Because as well, it's such a complicated problem. Like I mean, there are other small things, like in some areas they're hunted. For example, they're Ñeembucú, which is like the biggest protected Atlantic forest reserve. It's like part owned by the indigenous group who always lived there, called the Ache. They're allowed to hunt using their traditional methods inside the reserve. And capuchins are a big part of their traditional diet. But they kind of always were as well. And studies have shown that it doesn't really impact the population. These are old studies. It would be very interesting to see now if it still does, because there's so little forest left that these, like the traditional ways of life, may have been sustainable when there was 86,000 square kilometres of forest, but they might not be sustainable anymore. But even that, like, hunting, the pet trade is also a problem, but it also tends to be a byproduct of hunting. They are issues, and like if the habitat loss wasn't such an extreme problem, then it would probably be like worth saying, okay, let's find out more about the impact of hunting. Like, let's really tackle the pet trade. Let's like do something about it, because it's not actually legal here, but it's everywhere. But they just seem so insignificant in the face of like the scale of the habitat destruction. And it's like, it's such a complicated one to deal with, because so like if you take San Rafael, where like my project is based now, San Rafael's probably one of the most complicated sites for conservation. It's one of the most, if not the most important, and the most complicated. It gets called a national park. It's not a national park. It's an area designated to become a national park, which doesn't mean anything. Basically, the government was supposed to buy it like 30 years ago and declare it, and they never did. I don't know if they just couldn't find the funds or what, but it was never bought. It's got about 42 different landowners. The Buga Guarani are the biggest titled landowners in the area. Some of it's owned by private landowners, some of it's owned by corporations. It's under a lot of pressure, like a lot of pressure from illegal settlements. Marijuana plantations are a huge problem. Forest fires. In 2020, like 45% of the remaining forest was damaged by a fire, which was just devastating. But part of the reason it's so complicated is because you've got all these different stakeholders. So you've got like NGOs, landowners, the indigenous, the campesinos, and like everybody has a valid claim. And everybody has like a valid argument for why they should have their land and what they want to do with their land. But the problem is, every single one of those claims is completely mutually exclusive. Like there's no overlap. There's no like crossover with it. And also as well, like those groups hate each other. Like I've been in a room with representatives from all of those groups, and I just like sat there in shock while they all screamed at each other. Like it's not a case of like let's get everyone together. Obviously that is what needs to happen, but there's like historical animosity between them all that quite honestly needs solved first, and I don't know how you solve it. But like in Paraguay, like 85% of the land is owned by 5% of the people. It's a very, very unequal society. Everything's private. Like it's not, and it's a very capitalist society. Like very, very capitalist. If you don't have money, like you don't have a voice. That's just basically it. And so you've got these like huge sort of, I guess you could call them international problems with like the soy industry and things like that. But then on a local scale, you've got these social problems. You've got like severe poverty. So I mean, as an example, quite like I've called Paraguay before like the country where your logic comes to die. Like these ideas that kind of come from like North America and Europe, of like the one that kind of gets me always is just give the forest to indigenous people and they'll look after it. Right? I'm sure that that is the case in a lot of places. You know, I mean, I know that in the Brazilian Amazon, like that is the best way to protect forest. Where I work, that is not the case. That is not the case. Like the people that I like, the Buga Guarani people that I work with, live on a soy field because they live in such extreme poverty that they've had to rent their land to Brazilian soy farmers. Like, you know what I mean? Protect the forest is not an option for them. It's like they can't do that. They need the money. Like they don't have anything at all. I mean, like it's very, very depressing, but like these ideas that are sort of like pressed on you from like people who've never actually been here and have never seen it, like they don't always work. Like you have to take conservation sort of situation by situation, and that like that's a pretty big one here. It's like we need to solve like social needs first, which is not an easy thing to do. It's really not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it seems like an impossible problem of kind of all of these groups, all of these claims, all of these things. Yeah, and when I suppose it must be exceptionally frustrating when you have people from outside going, oh, why don't you try this one? It's worked perfectly well, when it is such a unique circumstance that it seems impossible to apply any of those kind of classic conservation kind of toolkits right away. Like, oh, this is the thing that we use here. This is the thing. That's an interesting and impossible. I wondered, obviously you said that it's very challenging. It's very kind of difficult to kind of get these things across. What is it that, and we've talked about how maybe the education programs and things that you're running are maybe starting to change the younger people's moods about nature and things. What is it that keeps you and your organization hopeful, I suppose, for the future? What is it that keeps you fighting for maybe the capuchin specifically, but the wider ecosystem as well? What keeps you invested in the fight?
I don't really know, honestly. Like, because for a really long time, like I feel like I was just angry. Like I like it was all so unfair. It was all so like uneven, and that just like really enraged me, and that just like kept me going. But like I just think it's like really, really important, because it's not like this is it's a really great country. Like it's such a shame that it's not more well known, and that it's not like really set up for tourists. Like if it could have a better ecotourism industry like Bolivia did, like how they built that, then it would do really well, I think. But it just, like, I want other people to be able to see the things that I've got to see while working in that forest. Like I want that to still be, I mean, at the rate it's going, like 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, like that forest is not going to be there anymore. I mean, Paraguay is predicted to be the first country in the world to lose all of its forest by 2028. So like that's how dire it is. And like I just like refuse to let that happen. Like that's just not, it doesn't matter what country it is, and it doesn't matter what country you're from. Like that, like this idea that, oh well, I wasn't born here so I shouldn't have a say, like I just reject that completely. Like it does, like if you are, it doesn't matter where, for me conservation's global, and it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're able to help and you're wanting to help, you should help. And like that was always like, as far as the monkeys go, like that was like my drive. Like I don't want them to not be there anymore. Like they need to be there. They're just like, they're great and they need to still be there. And then when I started working in the schools, Like I worked in rural schools since 2014 in some really disadvantaged areas. But when in 2018, when I was invited into the Buga Guarani schools, like that was when I understood like this is a human problem. This is not like I got it before that, but this was what really was just like, you know what, take all of your nice ideas about like these like I hate to say it, but these like woke ideas of what good conservation is, like just take them and shove them. They don't work here. Like they don't work here. And you need to listen to these people and learn from them, but then like help them. Like I have access to this network that they don't, and that they never will. I mean, even by my ability to speak English, like that immediately gives me access to a lot more like funding sources and things like that they just won't ever have. And I just feel like I moved here and Paraguay like was very, very welcoming, and like it's home, and I don't get to just sit there and go, oh well, you know what, I'm not from here, so I don't get to have a say. No, you know, I live here. I've lived here for a decade, a third of my life basically, and I'm gonna do everything that I'm capable of doing to try and help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's and I think it's one of those ones that I feel like that's a very relatable feeling for me, because I asked you, I think, an impossible question there, because I think I've people have asked me like, oh, why do you do conservation? Why is that the career path? And you kind of think, well, I don't think I need that. I don't. There doesn't have to be a good reason. I just believe that the things that exist on this earth that are not human deserve to be treated and protected.
Yeah.
They deserve to have their space, and they deserve to have room to thrive and exist and be there, because who are we as a human race to decide that we can decide what goes and what doesn't? And I think it's such a difficult thing, because then when you add that kind of thought process onto a thing where you want to help, inherently you want to help the people, and you want to kind of deal with the poverty as well, and then you want to kind of, it's such an impossible conundrum, because you are being pulled in so many different directions that how are you meant to answer them all and fix them all at once? It's an impossible scenario. But I think it's been a really interesting one, I guess, for me to hear about, and I think it will really hit whoever's listening particularly hard, and make them really think about everything that we've talked about, because it's so unlike every issue that we've talked about on the podcast previously. Everywhere else in the world, there's been different takes and there's been different things, but I think this is such a unique and interesting situation, and it's been so good to hear such a candid portrayal of it. I think it's been really, really interesting for me as well, and I hope the listeners will be hit and kind of have a lot to think about, a lot to think about, especially because, as we've said, it's not just home to the capuchin, it's home to all of these fantastic megafauna that people love, and it's home to things that are newly being discovered in that area. It's home to all sorts of weird and wonderful and bizarre things that hopefully the listeners will be inclined to want to protect and help and do something. I guess if there's someone listening who is hit hard by this or feels like they want to help or do something, what would you say to them if they were kind of listening and are now kind of feeling as enraged or as passionate as you have fired them up to be? What should the listener be doing to kind of help?
Well, I mean, if you fancy taking a trip, come down and volunteer and like actually see it, learn about it firsthand. But I think like just like sort of learning about it, like I think over the last couple of years, like I mean, obviously for any small NGO, things like donating, whether it's scientific equipment or like education equipment or money or like anything like that, obviously those are huge things. But I also understand not everybody can do that, and that's like completely fine. But I think that the sort of biggest thing that I think people can help with, and this isn't just like sort of Paraguay and PLT, but conservation in general, I think it's like being able to have conversations where people don't necessarily agree with you. Being able to hear things that challenge how you think conservation works. Because people have, I think in general, like as a society, a global society, we've lost the ability to do that over the last 2 years. Or maybe before that, maybe longer than that. But Like, people seem to, you say something that, okay, it's your reality on the ground, but somebody's decided that that's not how they think it should be. And instead of, like, listening to that, and, or even, like, asking why, people just go, no, you're wrong. Like, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. You're foreign, you're racist, you're this, you're that. And it's like, it's not helpful, you know what I mean? Like, we're all on the same side. And it's such a critical moment, and it's such a big deal that, like, we need to listen to each other, and we need to drop this idea that there are enemies, that there's, like, goodies and baddies in conservation. People have different opinions. Like, one of the best relationships that we've ever had as an organization is with a soy farmer. One of our biggest supporters. They're, like, one of the people who, like, the Capuchin project, he's supported it, like, all the way through. It wouldn't be happening without them. And, you know what I mean? And traditionally in conservation, you would think, well, no, you're the conservationist, he's the soy farmer, that's your enemy. And that's just, like, it's just not true. And it's not, we need to be able to work together. Like, conservationists don't have the power here. We don't have the money. We don't have the power. We have to be able to listen to the people on the so-called other side. And we need to also understand, like, what it is that what's their point of view. Like, what is it that they want, and how, because going in and just saying, like, the capuchin's great, look how cute this baby is. Like, don't cut down its trees. Like, they're going to go, like, all right, okay, but why not? What's in it? Like, yeah, it's very cute, but what's in it for me? Because that's how people operate, unfortunately. And then on, like, the other side, if you're dealing with people in, like, if you're dealing with people in disadvantaged communities, like, you want to listen and, like, okay, conservation's great, but let's find a way for you to make money out of it as well. Like, that, just being able to listen to everybody at every level. I'm not saying that everybody's going to be, like, great and easy to talk to. Like, they're not. But, like, being able to hear opinions that don't necessarily align with what you already thought. Like, being able to grow your opinions based on the evidence. Like, I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, as, like, how can people help? But being able to be in a position again where people across borders, across cultures, across languages can talk and can understand each other and can compromise, again, is something that we're not going to get anywhere, I don't think, unless we get back to that. Like, we have to be able to do that if we're going to make any sort of conservation change. And we need to, like, we're all here, we're all, like, whether we like it or not, we're all on the same, like, planet, and we're not going to be able to save it if we don't all work together, and everyone's going to have to compromise at some point.
I think that's fantastic advice, because I think, yeah, usually we get, like, very, like, interesting advice, but not such candid, challenging advice, and I think that's a really good one, because I think it's like it's interesting because it's something that I think about all the time, is that, like, whenever and I'm guilty of it, because I definitely said it during this interview, we use combative language when we talk about the fight for this and the fight for that, and we think about things in a very kind of, yeah, it's us versus them way. And I think in conservation there are so many issues like this where conservationists disagree on whether it be trophy hunting or zoos or whatever it is, whatever form of conservation that's the hot button topic of the day. Instead of screaming at each other and using this combative kind of attitude, yeah, we need to be able to sit and think and talk in a reasonable way. And that's always, it's the same as when you kind of go to someone on social media and you start shouting at them straight away because you don't like what they've said. Go with an open mind to all of these things. Go with it to prepare to be challenged, because I think that's certainly during my university career, I think that's what hit me the most. Like, that's when I did my degree in conservation, that was the point that I think changed me the most, was this ability to listen to other people and think, hang on, the way that I've been taught in the UK perhaps isn't the way that everyone's taught around the world about conservation, and the things that are villainised here are maybe not villains elsewhere. And, like, I think such really good candid advice, and I would encourage everyone to think about that one. I guess that kind of brings us to the end of the I almost said the conservation. That's just the beginning of the conservation, the end of the conversation. But what I wanted to ask before we kind of sign off and say bye and all that sort of stuff, is there anywhere, any resources or websites or places that you'd recommend that the listeners go if they want to learn more or about the organisation and your projects and things? Where should they go to kind of keep up to date and learn more about you and your work?
Yes, so our website is just paralatierra.org. It's going to be, we're hopefully going to be updating it quite soon. But for sort of the most up to date stuff, Facebook and Instagram, just Paralatierra will bring us up. It's the wee bird in the picture, the white-winged nightjar. And we're also on LinkedIn and Twitter. We're not very active on Twitter because it can be an awful hellscape of websites. So the Facebook and Instagram are probably the best places.
Yep, that's fair. That is very, very fair. And I'll put links to and things for all of that in the description of this episode, so people can go have a look, click right away across, go onto Instagram, go into things, find everything, support the work, learn more, keep up to date with everything that's going on. So I'll make sure that they're all easily accessible for them down there. When they're down there, if they don't mind, they could also click on our social media handles. You can find us at Pangolin Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're also on TikTok, which is a scary, scary place. That's my hellscape. Because I just don't understand it and I'm trying my best.
Yeah, that one I did for 15 minutes and was just like, I'm too old for this. It's not.
Yep. I feel like if I got too into it, I'd lose my whole life on it. So I went, no, it's best for me to try this and occasionally go on and see. But I can't, yeah. We're on there though. So if you want to, we're on there. You can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to us now. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the place. We're on Anchor. We're on Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. We're on there. So you can go and, give us a listen on there as well. Now, that brings us to the end of the show. And I just wanted to say before we go, a huge thank you, Rebecca, for everything that you've kind of told me that I've learned. I'm sure the listeners will also be thanking you for everything they've learned. So just a huge thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. That was great. That was good fun.
Perfect. And I guess until next time, thank you listeners very much for listening. And until next time, goodbye.